Hello and welcome once again to part 2 of India Today's Mood of the Nation survey, brought to you in collaboration with C-Voter, India's most definitive opinion tracker that gives you a sense of what is the mood of the nation on the big issues of our times.
We looked at the big numbers for Lok Sabha projections, what might happen if elections are held today. Now in this India Today cover, we're looking at the state of the economy. The Modi government's handling of the state of the economy. A quick note to our viewers about the methodology adopted by C-Voter to bring these numbers together for the India Today group. This poll was conducted between the 15th of December and the 15th of January. There are 35,909 respondents spread across 543 Lok Sabha constituencies. An additional 1,05,000 responders are from the C-Voter CATI telephonic survey. So that gives it an aggregate of 1,40,000 plus respondents. So Rajdeep, it's a big poll. We've looked at the political numbers. We look at economy and COVID now.
That's right, because remember, most people tend to believe that the economy remains an issue of critical importance to impact all areas of our lives. So what is the NDA's, how is the NDA's handling of the economy being perceived in a post-COVID world? In January 2021, good was 66%. Now, a year later, it is 54%. So actually the one area where the NDA's performance has dipped in a year is its handling of the economy from 66% to 54%, but up compared to August 2022 when it was down to 48%. Poor handling of the economy, 10% in Jan 2021, 29% in August 2022, and almost the same 28% in January. So clearly, Rahul, the one issue on which the government continues to be tested is its handling of the economy. It tends to divide public opinion.
Let's come to the question on unemployment. This question about how serious do people perceive the unemployment problem to be? There, importantly, the number of people who think the unemployment problem in India is very important has shot up from 45 to 54. So that's an increase of 9 percentage points in the number of people who think that the unemployment status is very troublesome. Somewhat serious, 19%, not very serious, 6%, not at all serious, 4%. So the number of people who think the unemployment situation is very serious is up now at 54%. On that note, let's welcome our guests, starting with Raj Chingappa, editor publishing for the India Today magazine. It's his team that's brought this together. Raj, welcome. To my left, Siddharth Zarabi, managing editor, Business Today Television. We've got with us on this broadcast Subhash Chandra Garg. He's the former finance secretary, author of the book The $10 Trillion Dream, has worked on many budgets and will give us a sense of what he thinks of these numbers from a governance perspective. Yashwant Deshmukh joins us. He is the lead cephalogist at C-Voter, the polling agency that's worked on bringing these numbers together. For a political perspective, I'm joined by Syed Zafar Islam from the Bharatiya Janata Party, Anshul Avijit from the Congress, and that essentially is our panel. And then there is Shankar Iyer, author and economist who's worked on many Mood of the Nations himself. So welcome to all our guests.
Okay, looking at these numbers then, Raj Chingappa, particularly on unemployment, between very serious and somewhat serious, 73% have a serious worry about unemployment. This is the one area where the Modi government doesn't seem to inspire the same confidence that it does in possibly other areas where we question them.
And that's the paradox, Rajdeep, because if you see the handling of the economy, they're getting higher ratings than what they had earlier, 6 months earlier. And the fact that at any point, a government like this, when you're dealing with price rise, when you're dealing with unemployment, normally their political numbers plunge. And as we saw, that their overall majority remains stable. So what explains it? I think one is that this COVID impact that is there, let's call it the long COVID, the people have in some senses attributed the problems to COVID, one side. Second, you've had the Ukraine crisis that has led to inflation. So there is a ready explanation as to why some of these major problems are happening. And third, we are seeing a global recession where people are losing jobs. We're seeing techies, which India really produces in large numbers, over 100,000 or so techies have lost their jobs. So there's a general feeling that the government is trying its best. They've been able to convince themselves, or the people, that, it's really international circumstances that are pushing this down. And so in some ways, one can only explain that. And third, I think, is the fact that they feel that there is, Mr. Modi and his government is making serious efforts to tackle the problem. And that, I will just make one small more point, in terms of welfare, for instance, that whole Garib Kalyan program, where they're able to give free food grain. So you're seeing that impact of all the welfare schemes, as well as the relief some of the industries got, particularly small-scale industries and deferment of interest rates and everything else. So overall that, but I think the period now, after this, is going to be very critical for the government this year.
Yashwant Deshmukh, how do you explain the seeming contradiction in the two trend lines? On the same subject, one question trending upwards, the other downwards. The handling of the economy seems to have got better from the last poll to now, whereas the number of people who think the unemployment situation is very serious has gone up. So people think that the economy is being handled well, and yet unemployment is a very serious problem. How do those two contradictory impulses play out simultaneously?
I think it's not that difficult to understand, Rahul, because yes, it is contradictory in nature in a sort, but it's like a patient going to a doctor. You ask about the problem or the thing that is troubling the patient and how much pain the patient has on a 0 to 10 scale, and whether or not that patient trusts that doctor is giving the right treatment, or whether it is going in the right direction, or whether he trusts that particular doctor. So I think something of that sort is happening over here, Rahul, because the concerns, the economic concerns are there to see. In our tracker, day after day, people are worried about inflation, about unemployment, their economic crisis. The number of people who are saying that running the household has become difficult and increasingly becoming difficult, those numbers are alarmingly high. But at the same time, when you ask them if you think that government is working in the right direction, or whom do you trust, or whom do you see is in government to find a solution, they still say that yes, the government is working in the right direction, and they say yes, Narendra Modi is the person whom they would like to look out for to find a solution for these problems. So it's larger the trustworthiness of brand Modi or Narendra Modi as a person or as a leader, that people are rating him high on that particular direction, even on the economic cycle.
Before you go to the others, there's something, I don't know, Rahul, whether you had it in school, called marks for effort. And I think what you're seeing in these areas, the word used, trustworthiness, there by Yashwant, is part of that, is that if you're seen as someone whose niyat is okay, that you're trying your best, people are willing to give you the benefit of doubt. And that's what's happening. It's not as if this is a high-performing government when it comes to the economy, but there's a sense that you're making an effort. And because of that, people who may not go into the intricacies of the economy are saying, "Nahi, sarkar theek thak kar rahi hai." And I think that's a huge advantage
but
that the
look
Modi
also
government
at the
has.
fact that there is a Russia-Ukraine war, that energy prices are very volatile, interest rates have so far largely been going up, inflation has been troublesome. Despite that, the Modi government has ensured that India remains an island of economic stability, and therefore they're getting those marks for effort.
That's right. It is marks for effort. It's not marks for outstanding work, in my view.
But given the nature of the global economy, Siddharth, it's impossible for one country to be growing at 10% plus when the rest of the world is grappling with the prospects of inflation. How do you look at these numbers and the fact that between August to January, the number of people who think the Modi government's handling of the economy is good has actually gone up by about 6 percentage points?
There are two ways to look at it. Look at the Modi government's inflation control, that primarily through the instrument of not allowing petrol and diesel prices to rise for many months on end. Please understand that fine-tuning fiscal and administrative policy to ensure retail pass-through of inflation doesn't happen is happening in India. For the first time ever in its history, or in the recent history, the US came out with the Inflation Control Act, where Rahul, billions of dollars of money are being thrown into controlling inflation. The Indian government does it in its own Indian way. Previous governments have also done this with petrol and diesel prices. I think that's coming through. But one quick interesting point, if you look at on a longer 2-year basis, the handling of the economy is still not at January 2021 levels. That's one data point I want to point out. The number of people who feel that their income has gone down, has actually reduced on a 2-year basis from 85 to 62%. And the third bit, opinion on unemployment situation, if you again look at it, it's very serious, which is the puzzling thing to me, because remember, last Diwali, the Modi government announced a 10 lakh 1 million job program. Some 75,000 job letters were given then. Second phase of another 71,000 job offers has been made out. And I feel here there is a big communication issue in the government's talking about that 1 million job program, because it's a very substantial program.
Okay, let's get some reactions from our guests outside the studio. We've got Subhash Chandra Garg, the former finance secretary. We've got Shankar Iyer as well. Shankar, I'll come to you first. In terms of how the government's handling the economy, more than half the respondents seem to think it's handled the economy well at a time of massive global uncertainty.
Well, there are two facts to that. One is the administrative control of the Modi government over various economic issues and the management of prices, the free food ration. So it's been responsive on some account. The other aspect is, of course, the comparative picture that India is doing better. But I want to make a point about the jobs thing that you guys were discussing. The real issue is that why you see the contradiction is because while the government seems to be making an effort, it is also seen to be not making the effort. There are for over the last 4 years, there have been roughly 8 lakh vacant posts in the central government and roughly over 2 million vacant posts in state governments. And the reason why Mr. Modi came out with this 75,000 every month job letter thing is to enable that communication. But in a country which is adding about 8 million people to its job force, give or take 1 million, depending on which month you take, the complete paradox of joblessness and vacant jobs is yet to be addressed politically. I mean, why would a party which is in power in roughly 15 states not fill up the posts that are vacant? I mean, the largest number of posts vacant are in health, education, and police. And
is that because, Subhash Garg, they're trying to ensure that government's salary budget doesn't skyrocket? Is that the logical explanation for why the government's trying to ensure it doesn't become too big a government, and therefore even if there are vacant posts, those aren't being filled? Or do you think this is actually short-sightedness, because filling in some of those resources could possibly create greater efficiency in terms of what the government is able to deliver?
See, in my understanding, the jobs or the vacancies which exist in the government are primarily in railways, the post and telegraph department, and many positions which are redundant now, the post of PAs and the stenos, etc., and the clerks. So these posts are actually not required to be filled in, and therefore these posts have been carried without being filled in for quite some time. The current attempt to probably fill them up is perhaps not very efficient. It will not add. But let me just make a comment on the main question which you are addressing today about the apparent contradiction between the Mood of the Nation report about the handling of the economy, which to a great extent majority seems to be saying that it's been handled well, whereas on the employment as well as your own status since 2014, which gives a negative sort of marks for that. To my mind, if you relate these two, the fact that the questions which pertain to you personally, the question about the employment, about your own status since 2014, indicate that this has led to sufferings, it has deteriorated. Whereas the questions which are larger, broader, which don't directly connect to you, where you go more by impressionistic sort of narrative, you seem to be saying that it might have been done better. The economy has not actually been handled very well in last 3 years. Our 4 years now, if you include the current year as well, 4 years average growth rate, including the contraction in the COVID year, is less than 3% per annum. That growth is the lowest growth ever in this country. In a situation where you have this kind of growth, where your exports are now declining, where unemployment is increasing, it's very, to my mind, inaccurate to say that the economy has been handled well.
You know, we can add to that, because when you look at who benefited most from the NDA's policies, and this is significant, in our survey, 58% are saying big business has benefited the most. Only 11% felt small businesses have benefited, salary class 8%, farmers 8%, daily wages 6%. So the perception, and this has been projected by the opposition, especially Rahul Gandhi, that this is a country of economic inequalities. There's a sense when you look at these numbers that clearly that it does resonate.
Zafar Islam, you want to respond to this? A 10% increase in 1 year in the number of those, in the percentage of those who say your government is helping big business the most?
Well, let me respond to all the questions so far we have discussed. First of all, the economy. I think India does not exist in isolation. It's a part of the global economy. And you should also take feedback from the global communities as well about the handling of Indian economy by the India government under Modi ji. The respondents, maybe the very small number is 140,000 out of the 140 million people. But still, away from that, I think you should also pose a question, the handling of economy in difficult situation, the global economy is in bad shape. Still, how we are handling the economy, and under Modi ji, and when during the financial crisis, how the economy was handled by Manmohan Singh ji. I think we'll get the response from most of the people that the economy in this situation, distress situation, is still being managed very well, and we are still exist as one of the largest and one of the fastest growing economies.
No, so we can take that question. We can take that question. Let me show the response to that question. Who managed the economy better? Narendra Modi, say 51% of the respondents. Manmohan Singh, say 36%. A 15% gap there, Anshul Abhijit. Problematic because Manmohan Singh was the economist, and yet at this time, more than half the respondents seem to think Prime Minister Modi is doing a better job of handling the economy.
Rahul, can I just complete,
Rahul, to that central paradox which you just said, and it's a question that's been asked to us all the time from people from the Congress, particularly after elections. Listen, why are people voting for Modi when there's so much of economic suffering? I mean, that is the central paradox here, which comes back here. Well, it's nothing unusual. Psephologists know about this all the time, that people are willing to forego or undermine their own economic suffering because there's a larger sentiment at work. I mean, it could be the peddling of religion, it could be majoritarianism, it could be some other reason. So it does not mean that people don't recognize, and that comes out in your survey, that there is no unemployment, there is no poverty. In fact, there is a perfect storm here. What this government has been very deviously and slyly doing is, peddle formal high-frequency data and make it look like the general health of the economy in reflection of a general health of the economy. The fact is that the informal economy has been completely devastated, particularly after demonetization, GST, and then you had the pandemic. It's also true that you've been feeding big business and taking money out of the hands of the poor, and I'll give you examples of this. This is not a perception of propaganda. You've cut corporate tax from 30 to 22%, right? You have a PLI scheme which has turned out to be a disaster because the chief economic advisor himself has said that except for two industries, mobile and pharma, they have not been creating any jobs. Right, so you've subsidized big industry. Then what you have done is lowered interest rates, so to think that no, private industry will actually create more jobs, there'll be more manufacturing. But what they ended up doing was deleveraging. Right?
Interest rates have actually been going up; they're not coming down. But that's
but you see, all of this is also happening, Rahul, No, just a minute. All of this is happening, remember, in the backdrop. We've seen what's happened in the markets over the last 2 days. We've seen the whole Adani issue snowball, the questions that are being raised as a result of a report filed by a research agency, Hindenburg. Now we've got the Congress party, Jairam Ramesh, issuing an official statement, Zafar Islam, that state-owned banks have lent twice as much to the Adani group as private banks, with 40% of their lending being done by State Bank of India. They've questioned also LIC pumping in money into the Adani group. Suddenly it seems that you do have, and I match this to our numbers saying big businesses have benefited. Should that be worrying or not? Is the BJP willing to answer the criticism that big businesses have benefited more than small and micro enterprises in the last few years?
I think, Rajdeep, I will, and I think you should go back to 2006, between the period between 2006 to 2012, and see how the balance sheet of the public sector banks have ballooned. Because every Tom, Dick and Harry, big, small businessmen, without a proper balance sheet, without proper credit evaluation, have been lent by these banks because they were put pressure. The pressure was being put on them by the Congress party, by the finance minister, by the first family of the Congress. And you see, the balance sheet size of till 2000 since independence was 80 lakh crore, and from 2006 to 2012. It ballooned to 53 lakh crores, 3 times. And that's when we had all the...
No, so you're right that public sector balance sheets are in a healthier position than they have been, but you haven't answered Rajdeep's question about this seeming perception reflected by our poll, where 58% of the respondents seem to think it's big business that's benefiting the most.
That's not true. That's not true. In fact, we have done so much for MSME. We have done for everyone. During the COVID, it is this government who has actually taken pains and provided support, financial support, policy reforms, everything working for them. And most of the SMEs have been benefited. No, but that's a little unfair.
You can't agree with all the data sets that support your argument and say that's not true. This is ultimately the mood of the nation, people's opinion on that question. And here, almost 60% of the respondents are saying that big business is the biggest beneficiary. You can't say Modi is the greatest prime minister, that he did a better job than Manmohan Singh. We agree with all of that, but we don't agree with this one finding. Surely it has to be taken in the spirit that it's given, that this is the mood of the nation on this particular question.
No, Rahul, I mean, I'm not discounting anything because it is, at the end of the day, survey. Whether it's true or false, it is for people to believe. But all I can say is that in terms of market capitalization, of course, all the listed companies, whether small, mid-sized companies or the large companies, have gone up. Where LIC invests in not only the large companies, LIC invests in 500 nifty companies. So there are 500 companies where, as per their mandate, they have to invest, and the money which is coming to them, they need to park. Not in one company they can park. They have to park in 500 companies. That are certain investment parameters they have to comply with, and this is parameter comes from the IRDA, not from the LIC committee or the board. It comes from the authorities or the IRDA.
Okay, I want to focus now on the economic outlook. So you have the IMF do its economic outlook, the RBI does its own economic outlook, but in the opinion of the 1,40,000 people who were sampled by Sea Voter for India today, what's the 6-month economic outlook? So 31% of our respondents say the economy will improve, 28% say it will stay the same, 31% say it will get worse. In the manner in which this is split 3 ways, it would suggest that people aren't quite certain of what happens next. They're hoping it will improve, but aren't certain. What's the forecast on household income? When people were asked, are your incomes likely to go up, stay the same? Here are the responses. 25% saying it's likely to improve, will remain the same 37%, 29% say it will worsen. That suggests to me, studying this data, Yashwant Deshmukh, that opinion quite starkly divided on issues of what happens over the next 6 months. There's no one bucket which is drawing the maximum responses. So respondents seem to be quite confused about where the economy goes from here.
Rahul, your voice was cracking. Can you just repeat the question?
I'm saying respondents seem quite conflicted about the direction the economy and household incomes take from here.
Well, yes, Rahul, a lot will depend on how the question of inflation is also tackled. Please remember that generally the common man on the street is more worried about on the day-to-day economy of his household base front, rather than the bigger strategies or bigger things that we generally discuss on the budget day. So they don't understand the fiscal deficit and other terminologies, but what they understand is if their life on a day-to-day basis is going to be made easier, is there something to be contradicted? And biggest thing of that all, in the last 9 years, Rahul, we have seen that the middle classes of this country have been consistently saying that they have been getting a raw deal. So it will be very interesting for me to see in the upcoming budget, which would be the last one, by the way, is the last one full budget before the next parliamentary election, if there is anything that the middle classes of this country are going to get in terms of bigger tax brackets and those kind of things.
Actually, when you
saves more, they wouldn't be able to spend more.
Sure, but actually, when you look at these numbers, they seem to suggest that people are wary about the future. In fact, I wouldn't say there certainly isn't a feel-good factor. When you add, for example, Rahul, household incomes will remain the same and worsen. It comes to 66%. So almost 7 in 10.
No, but when the global concern is about whether there will be a recession, surely there can't be much of a feel-good factor.
No, the fact is, Rahul, look, there Yashwant is right. If I am a person living in Badayu or living in a small town in Kerala, in Alleppey, I'm not worried about what's happening globally. I want to know how are things going to be for me over the next 6 months. There's no buoyancy. There's no sense that, things are going to be terrific. That's only 1 in every 3.
But we're not in a buoyant economic environment.
That's right. But how are you, the person in Badayu or Alleppey, he's not following economists. He's going to the market, he's going to the shop and finding, what is it in it for me? Despite that, as I said, there's a disjunction between voting preferences and how I stand. But I'm just wondering, Raj Chengappa, if there is an opportunity in all of this for the opposition to turn on the government. Is it the economy that they have to focus on? And that alone, there has to be a healthier economic debate. It's far too polarized even on the economy, as if the government has done nothing if you're in the opposition. And the government believes that we are, in an oasis of complete security. Do you believe there's a middle ground that needs to be explored?
Rajiv, I think there's of course an opportunity for the opposition, because with numbers like these and the pessimism that they're exhibiting, if 60% feel that the income is not going to go up, in fact, a lot of people feel it's going down and they're finding it difficult to manage the budget, this is something that the opposition should be highlighting. On the ruling party, there's a challenge, and maybe more than just a challenge, warning bells. If you have such a large number of people expressing dissatisfaction in the way their personal incomes, and I like Mr. Garg's sort of distinction, the larger economy, people, are more sort of saying okay about it, but when it comes to their personal, they're feeling the pinch and they're talking about it. So if you take that factor into account, you will see that this government has to take cognizance of second point, of the kind of conditions that are there, and they must improve them significantly in the next year and a half. And let us also go back in history, since Yashwant did our polls from 2000 onwards. There was this case where just before the elections in 2004, Vajpayee was getting very, very high numbers. Atal Bihari Vajpayee, the Prime Minister at that point. Yet, and in fact they had a campaign, India Shining, and yet within 6 months they lost the elections. So there is a warning for this government, and the government should, and that is a similar situation.
Let me take that to Siddharth. Siddharth, is this in some way an India Shining moment, or do you believe that Mr. Modi and his government is far more acutely aware of the ground realities and therefore will be careful not to place a drumbeat of that, that India is shining? Is the finance ministry conscious of that?
The economy in next 6 months, this is the most interesting set of data, frankly, because what it tells us is that from Diwali to Diwali, Indians sampled by this survey have grown more pessimistic. Their outlook has worsened. Look at it in terms of numbers. There is a 10 percentage point drop in people expecting improvement, which translates into a 33% increase in those who are pessimistic. And if you total same and worse, it tells us that there is perhaps a higher fear. Is
the government conscious of this? Is the government conscious that, while they may claim that all is well, people are pessimistic.
The government is conscious. You have already seen certain steps. But for this government's political economy focus, those steps have been taken when it comes to the bottom of the pyramid, which is the extension of the food grain scheme. The question that arises out of this, Rajdeep, which we will get an answer on 1st February is, will the middle class, where there will be a sampling bias in this, more middle class people, Yashwant can correct me, who must have answered this question, they will be looking forward to a break for the salaried class, because in another set of data in this same survey, salaried class is at 8% and continues to remain at the same level. So that's how I read this data.
So let's take those questions next. What is the status of your current expenses versus last year's expenses? When we compare data from January 2022 to now, those who say the current expenses have gone up is now at 28%. Those who say it's getting difficult, but yet it's manageable. So difficult to manageable in that grade, it's about 60%. Those who say current expenses have actually gone down are at 11%. So those who think expenses actually going up is 28%. What about your economic status since 2014, which is the period where Prime Minister Modi has been running the country? Those who say the economic status has improved is now at 33%, a marginal improvement between last year and now. Those who say it's the same is 28%, which has come down 5 percentage points. And those who say the economic situation has deteriorated at 35%. What's very clear, Shankara, here, is that unlike questions on politics, where the government seem to be doing overridingly well, on the economy, the MOTN report card far more fractured.
Well, I don't think we need to struggle too much about this question, Rahul, because this survey's findings simply reflect the reality of a K-shaped economy. So you have 33% who and 33% and 33%. I mean, the three-way split is explainable. Now, the reason why people feel their incomes may not improve is definitely connected to the general state of employment or unemployment. And I just wanted to correct Mr. Garg there. These job vacancies, that is education, paramilitary forces and police. And if the government thinks that they are redundant, then they should declare that. That would be the biggest reform of the last 8 years. Now, coming back to your question, Rahul, the point that one must accept is that in a growing economy, there will be some divergence in views. So if you look at the letter K, the upper leg seems to be doing okay or is not. The middle class, which is placed neither here nor there, is really the sufferer. And the bottom of leg of the K alphabet is where all the sops and the freebies and the free food and all that is going. So it is but natural for the middle class to feel left out. And that's the question that keeps popping up, not only in this survey, but in every discussion. So the question that the government needs to address is, how do they move the economy to create more jobs? Because more jobs, more manufacturing jobs through the PLI scheme or whatever, more jobs in construction and others will expand the incomes of the middle class.
Subhash Garg, how worrisome is the growing GDP perception that the government's policies have been helping big business? 58% saying it's helping big business. Syed Zafar Islam doesn't seem too perturbed. Politically, it doesn't seem to be much of an issue. But on this particular question, that seems to be the perception of the respondents.
See, the fact that now even the upper side of the K is also flattening. You must have seen the latest quarter results. Minus the financial companies, there's been reduction in the profit of the companies as well. So even that is now turning somewhat difficult. The lower part, the poor people's income growth is really well captured. To come to your question about the policies of the government, I think there is a little bit of slant in favor of the rich. The PLI is basically targeted at the big business. There is also this infrastructure spend at the cost of the government finances is also directed largely towards that. There is no big investment coming up in the country. The way the stock markets had gone up, and you're seeing now the results of the over enthusiasm in certain stocks coming to the reality. So I do get a sense that while the government had done and taken a lot of steps to also ameliorate the conditions of the poor by putting a cap on the export prices of the wheat and others, also in a way increasing the allowance for the food grains and keeping that free of cost now. But the larger resources of the government seems to be going towards the richer segment.
Zafar Islam, very quickly for the last time, the middle class, is that going to be, given that we are entering into an election year, be remembered at last by the Modi government? Achhe Din was presumably directed at the middle class 8 years ago. The fact is that that is where the mood of pessimism seems to be the highest. Is this government conscious of that, or are you still in an India shining moment?
No, well, we do recognize the new middle class emerging, and no, it's not a small number, it's a very big number of the middle class, and I'm sure the government of India under Modi ji do recognize the aspiration level of the middle class, and I'm sure their aspiration is being addressed. If you see all the previous budget as well as the post-COVID, all the policy announcement which have been made, their aspiration has also been taken into account as the policy was formed and announced. I'm sure that upcoming budget, the middle class expectation will also be taken into consideration.
What is the what is the one thing that the opposition would do that you believe that this government has not done? It's very easy to attack the government when you're in the opposition. What's the one thing that you would do that would actually lift the mood of pessimism that this survey seems to indicate over the economy?
Focus on the real economy, jobs, output. I mean, focus on creating jobs. The government, to my mind, I think either the government has no understanding of macroeconomics, right? They just simply do not know how to create jobs. They've been focusing on the wrong things, or their priorities are all skewed. I mean, you're focusing on one thing, but nothing is coming out of it. You've increased your capex last year by 7.5 lakh crores. But where are the jobs after that? Because you've always focused on infrastructural development where, which doesn't consume the nature of jobs it used to 20 years back, where lots of people used to come and, build roads and railways. So simply you have no understanding. Either get experts, maybe sitting out here, to understand what's going to happen. Increase MNREGA budget. You've cut down on MNREGA. You have an urban MNREGA scheme. I mean, there are a number of proposals which I can think of, but the government is not going to heed to that.
Okay, so let's look at the response on the question of whether the government has been able to create more jobs. When this question was asked in the India Today Mood of the Nation opinion poll, about 1/3 of the respondents said many jobs have been created. About 30% said little is being done on the issue of job creation, and 28% are not happy at all with the manner in which this question of jobs is being tackled. We're going to slip into a very quick break. When we come back, we look at the issue of cryptocurrencies, whether they should be banned or should they be regulated, should they be permitted, what's the response on that, and the government's handling of COVID. Everyone has his own opinion on what should happen to cryptocurrency. Should they be permitted, should they be regulated, should they be banned? Here is what the India Today Sea Voter Mood of the Nation opinion poll says people think on this very vexed issue. 48% say crypto should be banned. That's up 10 percentage points from January 2022. 20% say no, crypto should not be banned. That's down 8% from the last time. When we interviewed Siddharth, the RBI governor, at the recent Business Today Banking Summit, he was very clear crypto should be banned, and it seems, given the volatility in cryptocurrencies globally and the scams that have come to light, the mood seems to be hardening against crypto assets.
Absolutely, a realization of the pitfalls of trading in an unregulated product and the international experience, and therefore realizing that this is not a place to put your money into. I think that's the simplest way you can read this bit of data.
Okay, that's one interesting element. The other interesting element, there's pessimism, as we said, on income status and jobs. But when it comes to the Modi government's handling of COVID, the fact is that we have seen steady numbers for the government. Even now, in 2023, when asked how has the government handled COVID, 62% said good. So the government gets a strong rating on handling of COVID. Average was 16%, only 17% said it was poor. Has India completely recovered from the COVID crisis? Yes, to a large extent, 42%, yes, to some extent, 37%, no, 15%. So you add the first two numbers, they come to about 79–80%. So most people seem to believe that the worst of COVID is over. So that's where I think there's a sense of hope that things could only get better from here.
No, but
you've got worries about the economy in terms of incomes, but you know that maybe COVID is over.
But given how the Chinese economy and the Chinese state handled COVID over the last few weeks, the Indian government actually ends up looking much better. At a time when far less was known of the virus, the government was far more circumspect about dealing with COVID, rather than just going from zero COVID to letting it run free. So from being very careful to doing a Bolsonaro, Xi Jinping has actually made the Indian government's handling of COVID look much better.
And yes, let's give credit where it's due, Rahul. Certainly in the beginning there was a bit of stumbling during the second wave, but since then the government has really learned all the lessons that it needs to do. Let's not forget we had one of the most massive vaccination programs, COVID vaccination programs across, compared to the rest of the world. We had vaccines, a variety available for us to do so, and credit to the Indian scientists who did it. We had Bharat Bio, an indigenous vaccine, as well as a huge, an imported vaccine that was spread in huge numbers across the country. Treatment facilities vastly improved. In fact, we now have excess oxygen facilities, excess beds, which we had to downsize in some senses post that. And the fact that after the initial lockdown and the problems we had with Delta, the government went ahead without the kind of stringent lockdowns that China did. It learned from the first, the migration that it saw was far more effective in handling, rational in handling the third and the fourth, if there's going to be a fourth wave. Omicron, okay, definitely.
So let's take that last question now on the impact COVID had on people's economic status. Here, 62% of the respondents are telling us that their income has gone down through the period of COVID and because of COVID. It was 46% in August 2022. So from there, the number of people who say COVID has had a negative impact on economic status has actually gone up quite substantially, about 16%. Those who think that their income has gone up is actually down 9%, from 19% in the last poll to 10% now. So that's a very stark number, 62% saying that economic status has worsened because of COVID.
Rahul, we've done this now over 2 days. If you saw when we did Mood of the Nation, the first part, it clearly showed that people's voting preferences now increasingly do not mirror necessarily their sense of the economy in particular, or their sense of their personal status. A lot of people may feel that they are pessimistic about job situation, about their income levels, and yet you saw 67% satisfaction rating with the Modi government. And I think it comes down to what I said. I think people are willing to give you marks for effort.
Okay.
And when you then mark it with an element of trust, it comes down to credibility. I think that, this word satisfaction now will have to be changed to credibility. If people see the government having done a credible job, even if it's not fully successful, they're willing to give you the benefit of doubt. That's the sense I get at the moment from these conflicting numbers.
One quick exception, can I say?
Yes.
And I'm again harking back at history. Mr. Vajpayee, who was a poll star of his time, his popularity ratings, if you looked at the polls at that time, our own Mood of the Nation polls, was about 60 to 67%. But within a year, he lost. So I think there are warnings. I mean, it's good to draw these conclusions that, there might be a divorce between the way the economy is performing and the fact of trustworthiness and credibility. He had that much. So I believe still, and at the risk of repeating myself, you need to focus on the essentials, which is jobs. Even there, you need to focus on, say, housing, which brings jobs directly to people.
Let's take that to Yashwant. Let's take that to Yashwant. Because I think pollsters need to, every time we raise these questions about Modi, Modi ji, And we are reminded of Vajpayee ji. A Twitter user said that we always say Modi ji, why don't you say Vajpayee ji? So we'll say ji for everyone. But Shankar Iyer, you want to then finally give us your word on this? As someone who's tracked that Vajpayee era and now the Modi era, are there similarities you see between where Mr. Modi was January 2003 and where Mr. Modi is today in Modi ji is in 2023 Jan? Or do you believe the world has changed? And so have the Indian voters.
I don't think the Indian voter has changed very much. I think the social fabric has changed. The polarization in society is much more stark. And there is also the fact that in 2004, when Congress built the UPA coalition, they were visible. Today, the Congress is partly visible thanks to the Bharat Jodo Yatra. But the question for the opposition is that they have not yet provided any proof of concept that they can do it better than Mr. Modi.
You know, I think that's an important element also, Rahul, that I think there's a sense that you're going to have to provide a strong alternative program of action on all these points, whether it's the economy, whether it's COVID, whether it's strategic issues. And if that doesn't, it can't just be anti-Modiism. There's going to have to be a positive agenda that you're going to have to offer a strong narrative.